Providence Municipal Court was already packed when the man who thought he owned the city walked in. Not shuffled. Not hurried. He arrived. A hand-stitched Italian suit that looked like it came with its own security detail. A watch worth more than most people's cars peeking out from his cuff. Shoes so polished that the courtroom lights bounced off them. This wasn't just any defendant. This was Richard Ashford. Real estate tycoon, billionaire, developer of half the skyline outside those courthouse windows. And in his mind, this wasn't a courtroom. This was a minor inconvenience. A formality. A receipt to sign. He was there for something simple. A red light camera ticket, the kind of case that usually takes 5 minutes. Name. Plate number. Pay the fine. Next. But the second Richard opened his mouth, it became very clear. He didn't believe the rules in this room applied to him. The bailiff called the case with the same tone he used for everyone. Case number 16-294, Richard Ashford, violation of traffic control device, red light camera. Richard stood up like he was walking to the head of a boardroom table. Early 50s, expensive tan, silver hair perfectly styled. A dark Ermenegildo Zegna suit that probably never touched an off-the-rack hanger in its life. Hermes-tie diamond cufflinks, subtle cologne that smelled like private jets and old money. He didn't look nervous. He looked annoyed. At the podium, he didn't even glance around the room. No eye contact with the people sitting on the benches. No second look at the judge. Just the posture of a man who was here to sign a check, not answer for a mistake. Judge Frank Caprio looked up from the file with the calm, steady expression that has seen everything from nervous teenagers to exhausted single parents. "Good morning, Mr. Ashford." Richard didn't say, "Good morning, Your Honor." He didn't say, "Sir." Just, "Mornings," like they were two colleagues waiting in line for coffee. Judge Caprio continued, unfazed. "Mr. Ashford, you're cited for running a red light at the intersection of Westminster and Weybosset. The red light camera recorded your vehicle, a 2024 Bentley Continental, entering the intersection 1.3 seconds after the light turned red. Do you recall this incident?" Richard pulled out his phone. Not to check any evidence. Not to verify anything. He checked his calendar. Then looked back up. "Not really," he said. "I drive through a lot of intersections every day, but I'm sure it happened. Your cameras are always right, aren't they?" The judge didn't react to the sarcasm. "The evidence supports the citation," he replied evenly. "Yes." Richard clapped his hands softly once, like a meeting was wrapping up. "Perfect, then let's save us both some time. How much is it? I'll just pay it now so we can all move on." He reached inside his jacket and pulled out something almost nobody uses anymore. A leather checkbook. Not a debit card. Not a phone. A checkbook. "Just tell me the number," he said. "I've got a 10:30 with investors flying in from Dubai. They're not exactly the wait-around type." The courtroom shifted. People who'd been half distracted suddenly started paying attention. This wasn't anger. It wasn't fear. It was something else entirely. Entitlement. The kind that fills a room without raising a voice. Judge Caprio's tone stayed calm, but his eyes sharpened just a bit. "Mr. Ashford," he replied, "this isn't a quick settlement. This is a court proceeding. We're here to review the violation, not just collect money." Richard let out a patient, almost patronizing breath. "With respect, Your Honor, I know how these things work. I went through the light, your system caught it. I'm guilty, I'll pay the fine. No need for theater. Just give me the amount and we both get back to something more productive." He wasn't just dismissing the process. He was dismissing the entire idea of court. Judge Caprio glanced at the screen again. The standard fine for a red light violation is $85. Richard actually laughed. Not a nervous laugh. A genuine, amused laugh. "85, he repeated. "Your Honor, I spend more than that on lunch." A few people in the gallery shifted uncomfortably. Richard went on. "Look, let me make this easier. I'll write a check for $500, consider it support. Traffic safety, court funds, new paint for the walls, whatever you need. That should cover an $85 ticket and then some, right?" He said it like he was tipping a waiter, not addressing a judge. For the first time, the warmth in Judge Caprio's voice cooled. "Mr. Ashford," he said, "this court does not accept donations instead of following proper legal procedure." Richard sighed again, louder this time. The sigh of someone who believes they're the smartest person in the room and everyone else is wasting their time. "Judge, I respect your role truly," he said, in a tone that suggested he respected nothing happening here. "But I'm a businessman, time is money. Based on my company's returns and hours worked, my time is worth about $12,000 an hour. That's roughly $200 a minute every time I stand here talking about an $85 ticket." He looked down at his watch. "We've already burned 1,000. He smiled slightly. "Can we move this along?" A murmur moved through the courtroom. The delivery driver in the back. The older woman clutching her purse. The young guy in a hoodie waiting for his own turn. They all had the same expression. "Is this guy serious?" Judge Caprio answered, voice steady. "Your hourly rate, Mr. Ashford, has no bearing on courtroom procedure. You're here like everyone else. We follow the same process for every person who stands at that podium." Richard's smile faded at the edges. "With respect," he said, "I'm not everyone else, Your Honor. I employ over 2,000 people. I pay more in taxes in 1/4 than most people earn in a lifetime. I sit on corporate boards, I manage projects worth hundreds of millions. My company is valued at $1.8 billion. He straightened, letting the number hang between them. "I think that earns at least a little flexibility in how we handle an $85 traffic ticket." Now the air really tightened. The judge leaned back slightly, studying him, not angrily, just measuring. "Your success is impressive," he said finally. "Your contribution to the economy is noted, but none of that entitles you to different treatment here. In this courtroom, you stand where everyone stands." Richard shook his head, more frustrated now. "I'm not asking for special treatment," he insisted. "I'm asking for efficient treatment. There's a difference." "The efficient treatment," Judge Caprio replied, "is the process we already have. You're getting the same consideration as the person before you and the person after you." That was the moment something inside Richard snapped. The billionaire who was used to walking into every room and having people adjust to him suddenly realized. This room would not bend. So he did what entitled people do when the world doesn't move fast enough. He tried to remind everyone just how important he believed he was. He tilted his head, locked eyes with the judge, and asked, "Your Honor, do you actually know who I am?" The room went very still. "I don't mean that arrogantly," he added in a tone that was absolutely arrogant. "I mean literally, do you know what Ashford Development is?" "I'm familiar with your company," Judge Caprio said. Richard nodded. "Then you know I don't just own a couple buildings. I've built half this city, those glass towers a few blocks away. Mine, the hotel across the street. Mine, the parking garage where I left my Bentley this morning, also mine." He swept his hand toward the windows, as if the entire downtown core was his personal property portfolio. "When I build something," he continued, "it creates hundreds of jobs. It generates tax revenue that pays for your roads, your schools, your police, even this courthouse." He paused. "People like me keep cities like Providence alive." Now even Richard could feel that he was on a cliff's edge. But his ego pushed him one step further. "Look," he said almost casually, "I'm just being honest. There's a hierarchy. Some people create value. Some people maintain systems. Both are needed, but one is clearly more economically vital than the other." And then he said the line that would cost him thousands of dollars, 50 hours of his life, and a chunk of his public reputation. He looked directly at Judge Caprio and said, "Let's not pretend here, Your Honor. People like me own people like you." The courtroom didn't just gasp. It stopped breathing. Judge Caprio went silent. No gavel slam. No raised voice. No visible anger. Just a long, freezing pause as he looked at the billionaire who thought he owned the room. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, but it carried the weight of the entire justice system behind it. "Mr. Ashford," he said quietly, "did you just tell this court that you own people like me?" The room didn't move. No one shuffled. No one coughed. Even the fluorescent lights suddenly felt too loud. "I own people like you." The words hung in the air like poison. For a full 5 seconds, Judge Caprio didn't say a thing. He just stared at Richard Ashford, the billionaire who thought money gave him the right to say anything to anyone in any room. When he finally spoke, his voice was so calm it made the moment even more dangerous. "Mr. Ashford," he said quietly, "did you just tell this court that you own people like me?" Richard swallowed. His brain knew he'd gone too far. His ego wouldn't admit it. "I didn't mean it literally, Your Honor," he said quickly. "I meant economically, philosophically. I fund the system I help pay for." The judge cut him off. "You said," he repeated clearly and slowly, "I own people like you." He leaned forward slightly. There is no philosophical version of that sentence that makes it acceptable in this courtroom. A nervous rustle moved through the benches. Someone whispered, "He's finished." Another person just shook their head, staring at Richard with a mix of disgust and fascination. Richard tried to backpedal. "Your Honor, if it came out wrong, I apologize. I was trying to explain that taxpayers like me." "You weren't explaining economics," the judge replied. "You were reminding me that you're rich and I'm not, that you build towers and I just sit in one, that because your net worth has 9 zeros, you think the people who serve the public somehow exist for you." His tone didn't rise, but the weight of every word pressed on the room. "And then," he added, "you turned that belief into a sentence, I own people like you." Richard opened his mouth. "Your Honors, stop talking." 2 words, that was it. But they landed like a slammed door. Judge Caprio turned slightly toward his monitor and began typing. Not rushed, not flustered, slow, deliberate keystrokes. The courtroom was so quiet you could hear the faint click of each key. Richard's confidence, that polished armor he walked in with, was cracking. His hands, resting on the podium, began to tremble. Finally, the judge looked up again. "Mr. Ashford," he said, "the standard fine for a red light violation in this city is $85. That's what you came here expecting to pay." Richard nodded quickly, almost desperate. "Yes, exactly, But the judge continued, "We are no longer in a standard situation." He picked up a printed reference sheet, glanced at it, and then looked straight at Richard. "Under Rhode Island law, this court has discretion to enhance penalties when a defendant's conduct shows contempt for judicial authority or obvious disregard for the rule of law." He paused. "And today, your behavior has been a textbook example of contempt." He began to list it, one point at a time. "You described these proceedings as theater. You tried to bypass the process by overpaying the fine as if you were tipping a waiter. You told this court that your time is more valuable than ours. You implied that public servants exist because wealthy people fund them. And then you told a sitting judge that you own people like him." There was no shouting, no dramatics. Just a calm surgical breakdown of every arrogant move Richard had made in the last 15 minutes. Richard's face lost color. "Your Honor," he stammered, "I'll pay the fine, I'll even." "You will," the judge interrupted, "but it will not be the fine you walked in here expecting." He straightened the paper in front of him. "For your red light violation, the base fine remains $85. Richard exhaled slightly. Maybe this was going to be survivable. "However," the judge continued, "for your open contempt of this court, your treatment of this process like a financial transaction, and your statement that you own people like me." He let the sentence hang. "I am enhancing that penalty." He looked Richard dead in the eye. "Your total fine is $5,000. The reaction was instant. Someone in the back whispered, "5,000. Another person let out a quiet, "Whoa." A young guy in a hoodie muttered, "That's more than my car." Richard blinked as if he'd misheard. 5,000, he repeated, for a light that changed 1.3 seconds earlier. "No," the judge corrected calmly. 85 for the light, 4,915 for the contempt. "That's insane," Richard snapped. "You can't charge me $5,000 for talking. I spoke honestly about how the economy works." "I'm not penalizing you for honesty," the judge replied. "I'm penalizing you for contempt, for treating this courtroom like a negotiation, for thinking your money buys you shortcuts, for telling a public servant that you own him." Richard's voice rose. "I apologized for that," he insisted. "I said it came out wrong." "You apologized," the judge said, "after you saw my reaction. That isn't remorse, that is damage control." A quiet oof rippled through the gallery. Richard tried a different angle. "This is an abuse of power," he said. "I'll appeal this ruling, my legal team will." "I encourage you to appeal," the judge replied instantly. Because then an appellate court will review the full video of this hearing, including the moment where you looked at me and said, "I own people like you." He tilted his head. "I'm confident they'll understand my ruling perfectly." For the first time since he walked in, the billionaire who thought he controlled every room realized. He had no leverage here. No investors to impress. No city officials to sway. No lobbyists to whisper in anyone's ear. Just a judge, a courtroom, and the echo of his own arrogance. Richard swallowed hard and tried one last push. "Your Honor, I employ over 2,000 people. I have obligations, deadlines, investors flying in, projects running across multiple cities. I can't." "And I," Judge Caprio replied, "have a courtroom to maintain, with rules that apply equally to everyone, billionaire or broke, CEO or cashier. In this room, your 1.8 billion means absolutely nothing." He let the words sink in. But he added, "We're not finished." Richard's eyes widened. "Not finished?" The judge folded his hands. "Mr. Ashford, I'm going to do something I rarely do. I'm going to give you a sentence that matches the lesson you clearly never got from your bank balance." He took another note. "In addition to your $5,000 fine, I am ordering you to complete 50 hours of community service." Richard stared at him. "Community service," he repeated. "I'm a CEO, I don't have time." "You'll make time," the judge said, not unkindly but with zero room for debate. "You told me your time is worth $200 a minute. 50 hours of your time is, by your own math, worth $600,000. Consider it a donation to the community you claim to support." Richard's jaw tightened. "And where exactly," he asked stiffly, "am I supposed to do this community service?" The answer came without hesitation. "At Providence Community Kitchen," the judge said. "They serve meals to homeless individuals and low-income families. You'll work in the kitchen, serve food, wash dishes, take out trash, whatever they need." A few people tried not to smile. "You're sending a billionaire to wash dishes," Richard said bitterly. "I'm sending a man who clearly needs humility to serve people he's never noticed," the judge replied. "Maybe standing on the other side of a counter from people who worry about their next meal will help you understand something your portfolio never taught you." Richard's voice turned sharp. "This is humiliating." "No," the judge answered calmly, "this is accountability." He turned to the clerk. "Mr. Ashford has 30 days to pay the $5,000 fine," he said. "He has 90 days to complete 50 hours of verified service at Providence Community Kitchen. Failure to do either will result in a warrant for his arrest. Do you understand, Mr. Ashford?" Richard's mouth was dry. "Yes," he forced out. The judge nodded once. "Good, you are free to go." Then he paused. "Oh, and Mr. Ashford." Richard looked up. "You mentioned earlier that you own several buildings nearby. The hotel, the tower, the parking structure where you left your Bentley." The judge's expression didn't change, but his voice carried a new weight. "Let me remind you of what you do not own. You don't own justice, you don't own respect. You don't own the law, and you absolutely do not own the people who dedicate their lives to serving this community." He leaned back slightly. "My father was a laborer. My mother cleaned houses. They taught me that a person's worth has nothing to do with their net worth and everything to do with their character." He looked straight at Richard. "And today, your character was deeply lacking." Richard couldn't meet his eyes. "You're dismissed," the judge said. "I suggest you hurry to that Dubai meeting, though I imagine it will be a little harder to talk about owning anything, knowing you're $5,000 poorer and 50 hours closer to a dishwashing shift." A few people couldn't help it, they smiled. Richard turned and walked out of the courtroom. This time there was no confident stride. No casual arrogance. Just a billionaire with his head slightly down, walking past people who had just watched his ego get dismantled in real time. Outside the courthouse, the mask came back on for a moment. Richard stepped onto the sidewalk, yanked his phone from his pocket and called his lawyer. The moment the call connected, he exploded. "This is insane," he snapped. "He fined me $5,000 and stuck me with 50 hours of community service. Over a red light and a few comments, we're appealing. I want this overturned." On the other end, his attorney sighed. "Richard," he said, "the whole hearing was recorded." "I don't care," Richard shot back. "Judicial overreach, abuse of discretion will challenge it." "Richard," the lawyer interrupted, "I've already seen the footage." He paused. And I've already heard the part where you look a judge in the eye and say, I own people like you. Silence. If we appeal, the lawyer continued, that clip will be everywhere. News, social media, commentary channels, late-night shows, you won't just be a billionaire. You'll be the billionaire who told a judge he owned him. Richard didn't say anything. My advice, the lawyer finished, pay the fine, do the 50 hours, and never talk to a judge like that again. The line went quiet. For the first time in a very long time, Richard Ashford realized something terrifying. There was no check he could write to fix this. Not his PR team. Not his board of directors. Not his investors. This wasn't a scandal to bury. This was a mirror. And it was about to follow him all the way into a cramped, noisy kitchen, where a man worth $1.8 billion was about to learn how to spray down plates and scrub pots next to people who had nothing. 3 weeks later, the billionaire who strutted into court like he owned the world stood outside Providence Community Kitchen, staring at a metal door that looked older than some of his properties. He hesitated, not because he couldn't handle it, but because for the first time in years, maybe decades, he felt something unfamiliar. Nervousness. Richard adjusted his collar. Even now, on community service day, he couldn't help himself. Designer jeans, a navy polo worth more than the average weekly paycheck, and shoes that were not meant for industrial kitchen floors. But he tried. He really did. This was him dressing down. He took a deep breath and walked inside. You the billionaires. The voice came from a woman who looked like she could run a small army with nothing but a clipboard and sheer will. She was 62, short, fierce gray hair pulled tight, apron smudged with flour. This was Maria, the kitchen manager. 20 years in the same job, 20 years holding this place together. She didn't flinch at chaos, hunger, or hardship. But she did squint at Richard like he was a mislabeled can in her pantry. Yes, ma'am, Richard admitted. You ever worked in a kitchen before? She asked. No, ma'ams. Dish pit, she said immediately. Follow me. And that was that. No sympathy. No special treatment. No, oh, you're the billionaire from the news. Just a dish pit. She led him to the back where a mountain of plates, pans, trays, and bowls waited. Steam rose. Water splashed. The air smelled like onions and soap and something frying. Grab gloves, start with the pots, Maria said. Then she walked away. For the first hour, Richard scrubbed in silence. And reality hit him like the smell of industrial dish detergent. His back hurt. His shoulders burned. Soap stung his eyes. Water soaked into his overpriced shoes. He was sweating, actually sweating. Meanwhile, volunteers around him worked efficiently, smiling, chatting, moving as a team. They'd done this for years. This was their world. He was an outsider trying to keep up. He dropped a pen. Someone laughed, not cruel, just amused. Don't worry, rich man, a young volunteer grinned. Dish pit is undefeated. Richard forced a smile. For the first time in his adult life, he wasn't in charge. By hour 4, he was exhausted. During his break, he stepped outside, sat on a concrete step, rubbed his hands already pruned and red from soap. A homeless veteran sat beside him, lighting a cigarette with hands that shook slightly. His jacket was worn, his face lined with decades of hard stories. You that guy from the news? The veteran asked. Richard exhaled through his nose. Yeah, that's me. The one who told a judge he owns people. Richard closed his eyes. Yeah, he whispered, that was stupid. The veteran took a drag, nodded slowly. Yeah, he agreed, it was. Then he looked at Richard, not with hate, not with judgment, but honesty. You know what you can't own, the veteran said, dignity. He tapped his own chest. You either got it or you don't. He looked at Richard's dish-soaked hands. But washing dishes, he continued, that's a start, means you're trying. Richard didn't know what to say. For once, he just listened. By his second week, something had shifted. The billionaire who lectured a judge about efficiency now moved quietly between volunteers, handing out trays, greeting guests, asking names. He saw the same faces every shift. The elderly woman with the oxygen tank who always apologized for being trouble. The single mom who worked 2 jobs. The young man who never looked anyone in the eye. These were not the people in Richard's board meetings, his investor calls, his glossy brochures. But they were people, human, real, living. And he realized something that shook him more than any fine or lecture. He had never truly seen them before. Not once, not in 50 years. His world had always been skylines, spreadsheets, profits, margins, boardrooms, and power. Here, none of that mattered. A billionaire and a broke teenager scrubbed the same pan. A guy who owned half the city stood next to a man who slept under a bridge. A CEO wiped tables beside a mother who couldn't afford diapers. And for the first time in decades, maybe ever, Richard wasn't above anyone. He was with them. On his 50th and final hour, Maria approached him with her arms crossed. "I'll be honest," she said, "I didn't think you'd last." Richard nodded. "I didn't think I would either." "But you showed up," she said. "You worked, you didn't complain." "Well, not that much," she smirked. "And you learned." Richard swallowed. "Yeah," he said softly. "I learned that I was an arrogant fool. I learned that money didn't make me better than anyone." He looked around the kitchen. "I learned I couldn't buy respect." Maria stared at him, her expression softer now. "Well," she said, patting his arm, "that's more valuable than your Bentley." Richard laughed under his breath. Maybe for the first time, genuinely. 6 months later, Providence Community Kitchen received a letter. No return address. No signature. Just a cashier's check. $500,000. In the memo lines. For food, supplies, and dignity. Maria smiled. She didn't need a name to know exactly who sent it. When Richard walked back into Judge Caprio's courtroom to show proof that he'd completed his sentence, the atmosphere couldn't have been more different from the day he first arrived. No Bentley swagger. No diamond cufflinks. No superiority in his stride. He walked with quiet shoulders, steady breaths, and a humility that made even the courtroom regulars exchange surprised glances. Judge Caprio scanned the document confirming all 50 hours of community service. He looked up slowly. "Mr. Ashford," the judge began, "did you complete the service yourself? No assistants, no stand-ins." Richard shook his head. "No, Your Honor, I did every hour." There was a pause. "And did you learn anything?" Judge Caprio asked carefully. Richard swallowed, and for a moment the same man who once declared, "I own people like you," had trouble speaking. "Yes, Your Honor," he finally said. "I learned more than I expected, more than I deserved. I learned that money doesn't measure worth. I learned that humility matters. And I learned that respect is a responsibility, not a transaction." The judge studied him for a long moment. "Good," he said quietly, "because this courtroom isn't here to punish people, it's here to realign them." The gallery listened in complete silence. Then Judge Caprio delivered the message that would become one of the most replayed courtroom moments online. "Mr. Ashford, you told me that you own buildings, properties, businesses. But after watching you today, I can tell you this. You do not own dignities. You do not own decency. You do not own justice. You do not own peoples." His voice deepened. "And the day you tried to buy respect was the day you learned the one thing no billionaire can ever purchase: accountability." Richard nodded slowly. "Yes, Your Honor, I understand that now." Judge Caprio leaned back. "You came here with $1.8 billion and a belief that the world runs on your terms, but the law levels that field. In this room, every person, wealthy or struggling, stands on equal ground." Richard blinked rapidly, fighting the embarrassment and gratitude tangled inside him. "I appreciate the lesson," he said softly. "It wasn't a lesson," the judge replied. "It was a reminder that the value of a life isn't calculated in dollars." The judge dismissed him and Richard walked out, not with humiliation this time, but with a different kind of weight. A healthy one. Outside, someone recognized him. "That's the guy who told the judge he owns people," a man whispered. But Richard didn't flinch, he didn't bark back, he didn't puff his chest. He simply nodded, walked down the steps, and got into a very normal-looking sedan instead of his Bentley. Because some lessons don't just change a reputation. They change a person. 3 weeks later, during the Wednesday lunch rush at Providence Community Kitchen, someone walked in carrying a thick envelope addressed to Maria. Inside was a cashier's check for $500,000 and a handwritten note. For food, supplies, and dignity. From someone who needed a wake-up call. Maria smiled, folded the note, and tucked it in her apron's secret pocket, the pocket where she kept reminders of why she did this work. She didn't need to tell anyone who sent it. Everyone already knew. Richard Ashford walked into court worth $1.8 billion. But he left with something far more valuable: humility. He learned that wealth can buy luxury, convenience, comfort. But it cannot buy characters. It cannot buy respect. It cannot buy dignities. And it absolutely cannot buy justice. Because in Judge Caprio's courtroom, the rule has always been the same. Your net worth doesn't decide your worth. If you believe courtrooms should always be equalizers. If you believe arrogance deserves consequences. If you believe respect is earned, not purchased. Share your thoughts in the comment and subscribe to our channel for more moments when the justice system reminds the world that no fortune is bigger than the law.